You're listening to the Archetype Effect, conversations redefining power, purpose and leadership for women and the coaches who guide them. I'm Ros Cardinal, leadership coach and creator of the Women's Leader Archetypes. Together we'll explore the real stories, the research and reflections that help women rise with clarity and authentic power. There's a woman who genuinely loves people. Not in a strategic way, not because she should, but because she's energised by connection. She enjoys conversation. She enjoys laughter. She enjoys the subtle dance of being in a room with others and feeling the current of it shift. She's at her best when she's around people. She notices how someone's arriving. She senses when energy dips. She can feel when a group is off balance and almost instinctively knows how to bring it back. She's warm. She's engaging. She's the kind of person others feel comfortable with quickly. People open up to her without quite knowing why. They talk to her after the meeting. They confide in her in passing. They seek her out when something feels delicate, unspoken or unresolved. And she enjoys that. Not because she needs to be needed, but because relationships matter to her. Connection is where she comes alive. She values harmony. She values belonging. She values the quiet strength of people feeling safe together. This is the tribe builder. And when she's in her natural rhythm, this energy is generous, it's grounded and deeply human. But there's a moment, and it's really dramatic, when something shifts. She doesn't stop loving people. She doesn't withdraw. She doesn't harden. Instead, connection starts to carry weight. She begins to notice how quickly she steps in when things feel tense, how naturally she smooths over the rough edges, how often she takes responsibility for how others are feeling. She doesn't think of this as a problem. It feels like care. It feels like contribution. It feels like leadership. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, connection stops being something she enjoys and starts becoming something she manages. And if she's honest, truly honest, there's often an unspoken fear underneath it. If I don't hold this together, if I don't keep things okay, if I stop doing my part, something might fracture. A relationship, a sense of belonging, a feeling of safety. So she keeps going. She adapts, she accommodates, she carries more than her share, emotionally, relationally, quietly. And because she's good at it, no one questions it, not even her. This episode is for the women who don't disappear by pulling away. They disappear by overgiving, by turning connection into responsibility, by slowly stepping out of themselves in order to keep everyone else comfortable. Before we talk about cost, we need to stay here a little longer, because the tribe builder is not a problem to be fixed. She's a capacity to be understood. In a world that often equates leadership with decisiveness, authority and control, the tribe builder's power can be easy to miss, even by herself. It doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, relationally, almost invisibly. She leads through presence, through noticing who hasn't spoken yet, through sensing when a conversation needs softening or deepening, through creating a sense of safety that allows people to show up more fully. This isn't accidental, it's social intelligence. The tribe builder understands something fundamental about human systems. People don't engage where they don't feel they belong. So she builds belonging. She draws people in. She connects across difference. She creates bridges where others might see friction. And when she's resourced, this doesn't drain her, it energises her. She enjoys people. She enjoys shared laughter, shared meaning, shared moments of understanding. She's often the one who remembers personal details, not as a tactic, but because she genuinely cares. She can hold warmth without losing competence, empathy without losing clarity, connection without losing momentum. This is not softness. This is relational authority, and it's powerful. Because groups don't function on strategy alone. They function on trust, on psychological safety, on people feeling like they matter. The tribe builder intuitively knows this. She can feel when a group is cohesive and when it's fragmenting. She notices subtle shifts in tone, energy, and inclusion that others overlook. And she acts, often without anyone realising she has. She might reframe a comment to land more gently. She might bring someone quieter into the conversation. She might check in privately to repair something that felt off. These moves aren't about control, they're about care. And when the tribe builder is operating from her centre, she doesn't disappear in the process. She's present. She's grounded. She's fully herself in the room. Her influence circulates. People feel steadier around her, more willing to engage, more able to collaborate. This is why tribe builders are often described as the glue. But glue doesn't just hold things together. It creates cohesion, and that's leadership. Especially in environments where trust is fragile, pressure is high, or people are stretched thin. So before we go any further, I want to be clear about this. If you recognise yourself here, nothing has gone wrong. Your love of people is not naive. Your desire for connection is not weakness. Your capacity to attune, include, and build belonging is not something to outgrow. It's something to protect. Because this archetype doesn't burn out from being relational. She burns out when connection stops being mutual. And that's where the story begins to shift. The change rarely announces itself. There isn't a moment where the tribe builder thinks, I should start doing more. I should take this on. I should carry everyone. It happens in increments. A conversation that feels delicate, so she steps in early. A misunderstanding she senses before anyone else names it. A tension she smooths over because it would be uncomfortable to let it linger. At first, this feels like leadership. It feels like contribution, like maturity, like being someone others can rely on. The tribe builder has a remarkable capacity to regulate emotional environments. She can sense when a room is tipping. She can feel when someone's pulling away. She notices the moment when something small might turn into something larger. So she adjusts. She softens her tone. She reframes a comment. She checks in privately. Not because she has to, because she can. And because she values harmony, this doesn't feel like effort, it feels like care. But here's where the shift begins to matter. Over time, her responsiveness starts to become expected, not demanded, not stated explicitly, just assumed. She becomes the person who handles the tricky conversations, the one who absorbs frustration so it doesn't spill, the one who makes things feel okay again. And because she's good at it, no one questions whether it should always be her, including her. She doesn't actively think, this isn't my responsibility. She thinks, it's easier if I just take care of this. It's not worth the discomfort. I can manage it. And those thoughts make sense. They're efficient. They keep things moving. They preserve connection. But slowly, connection starts to carry weight. She begins to feel responsible, not just for relationships, but for outcomes, for how people feel, for whether tension escalates, for whether the group stays cohesive. She becomes a kind of emotional shock absorber. And because emotional labour is largely invisible, it rarely gets named. There's no role description, no acknowledgement, no natural endpoint. It just accumulates. She notices she's always the one checking in, always the one adapting, always the one holding space. Not because others are incapable, but because she's already doing it. And this is the subtle danger of being good with people. When you can manage relational complexity, the system starts leaning on you. Not maliciously, conveniently. And the tribe builder doesn't resist this at first, because she still feels connected. still feels valued, still feels like she belongs. But the quality of that connection has changed. It's no longer fully reciprocal. She's giving more than she's receiving, holding more than she's sharing, managing more than she's naming. And because she's oriented towards others, it can take a long time before she notices what's happening inside her. But something has shifted. Connection is no longer just where she comes alive. It's becoming something she's responsible for maintaining. And responsibility changes everything. To understand what's happening here, we need to widen the lens, because this pattern doesn't come from personality. It comes from survival. What we often describe as the martyr is closely connected to what's known as the fawn response to threat. It's not fight, not flight, not freeze. Fawn. The instinct to appease, to soothe, to keep things calm, to make yourself agreeable enough that nothing worse happens. This response isn't chosen consciously, it lives in the body, and for many women it has deep roots. For a very long time, historically, socially, relationally, women's safety depended on relationships, on being liked, on being approved of not provoking anger or rejection. Being nice wasn't about politeness, it was about protection. Protection for themselves, protection for their children, protection for their place in the group. So over generations, women learned something powerful and costly. Connection equals safety, disruption equals danger. That learning doesn't disappear just because the world changes. It gets passed down quietly through stories, through modelling, through what's rewarded and what's punished, and it becomes embodied. So when a woman senses tension, her system doesn't ask, is this fair? Is this mine to carry? It asks, how do I keep this safe? And safety here doesn't mean comfort. It means belonging. It means not being excluded, dismissed or turned against. So she adapts. She softens. She smooths. She gives more than she should, not because she wants to disappear, but because disappearing feels safer than rupture. This is important to name clearly. The martyr is not weak. She's not naive. She's not trying to be virtuous. She's responding to threat with a strategy that once worked. Keeping the peace. Absorbing tension. Making things okay. And because this response is rewarded, praised as kindness, generosity, emotional intelligence, it gets reinforced. She's told she's so good with people. She holds everyone together. She's so understanding. And that affirmation feels good. It confirms that her way of being has value. So the pattern deepens, not because she lacks boundaries, but because she learned early that boundaries could be dangerous. And when this response becomes chronic, something subtle happens. Connection stops being mutual. It becomes something she earns, something she maintains, something she protects at her own expense. And she doesn't call this survival. She calls it being responsible, being kind, being a good person. But underneath it all, there's a nervous system still asking the same question it learned long ago. How do I stay safe in this group? And the answer it reaches for is the one it knows best. I make things okay. I don't rock the boat. I carry more than my share. That's where the martyr begins, not as a flaw, but as a legacy. This is the point where something subtle but profound begins to happen. Up until now, the tribe builder has been doing something, stepping in, smoothing over, making space, holding people together. But here the pattern deepens because what started as behaviour begins to harden into identity. She doesn't say, I'm choosing to put myself last. She says, this is just who I am. I'm the one people come to. I'm good in these situations. And in many ways, that's true. She is good in these situations. She has an extraordinary capacity to tolerate emotional complexity. She can sit in discomfort without panicking. She can hold competing needs without immediately needing resolution. And because she can, she does. Again and again. The martyr doesn't emerge because she wants to suffer. She emerges because she's learned that her value lies in her willingness to absorb what others cannot or will not carry. So she takes on the emotional work. She mediates, she reassures, she explains, she soothes, she notices when someone's upset before they say it. She adjusts her behaviour to keep things smooth. She anticipates needs and fills gaps before they become visible. And none of this feels big. It feels normal. Because over time, being the one who holds things together becomes familiar. It becomes a role she inhabits without thinking. But there's a cost to this role that often goes unnamed. Because when you are always the one adapting, you stop asking a different question. What do I need right now? Not because you don't have needs, but because your attention is consistently directed outward. And gradually your own internal signals become quieter. You might notice it as a kind of disorientation. You're not unhappy exactly, you're not in crisis, but you feel slightly removed from yourself. You find it harder to answer simple questions. What do I want? What do I actually feel about this? What would I choose if no one else's needs were in the room? And instead you default to what you've always done. You consider others first. You take the temperature of the room. You adjust accordingly. You make yourself smaller in moments where standing firm might create friction. Not because you're afraid, because you're protective. Protective of relationships. Protective of harmony. Protective of belonging. This is where self-sacrifice begins to feel like virtue, because it's rewarded. People appreciate you. They rely on you. They trust you. You're seen as kind, as generous, as emotionally intelligent, and these qualities are real. But when they become the primary way you secure safety, something else quietly slips away. Choice. You stop noticing where you're choosing to give and where you're giving because it feels required. You stop distinguishing between generosity and obligation, and over time, the line between care and self-abandonment blurs. This is why the martyr is so hard to recognise from the inside, because she doesn't feel powerless. She feels needed. And being needed can feel like belonging. But being needed is not the same as being met, not the same as being seen, not the same as being supported. And when this identity takes hold, saying no doesn't just feel inconvenient, it feels like a threat to who you are. If I don't do this, if I don't step in, if I don't carry this, who am I? And will I still belong? So the martyr keeps going. She keeps giving. She keeps absorbing. She keeps holding. And she tells herself, often sincerely, that she's fine. That this is just how things are. That this is what being a good person looks like. But inside, something else is happening. A quiet accumulation. A sense that the cost is rising and that no one is quite noticing. There is a feeling that often appears at this stage, quietly, uncomfortably, almost apologetically. Resentment. Not the dramatic kind, not rage, not bitterness. Something softer and yet more corrosive. It sounds like, why am I always the one doing this? Why do I seem to care more than everyone else? Why does it feel like if I don't step in, everything's going to fall apart? And the moment this feeling appears, something else usually follows. Judgment. She tells herself she shouldn't feel this way, that she chose this, that others are doing their best, that she's being unfair, ungrateful or selfish. Because resentment doesn't fit her self-image. She sees herself as kind, as generous, as emotionally aware, not resentful. So she pushes it down. But resentment doesn't disappear when it's dismissed. It goes underground. And when it does, it changes shape. It turns into irritability that surprises her, into impatience that feels out of character, into a sharpness in her tone that she immediately regrets. Or it turns inward, into guilt, into self-criticism, into the quiet belief that something is wrong with her for feeling this way at all. But resentment in this pattern is not a moral failing. It's information. It's the nervous system's way of saying something is being given that is not being replenished. Something is being carried that was never meant to be carried alone. The martyr doesn't resent others because they're cruel or demanding. She resents them because she's learned to give without asking and to give before checking in with herself. And here's the part that's hardest to see. Much of that resentment is not actually directed outward, it's turned inward. Because on some level, she knows she's been overriding herself. Not consciously, but incrementally. She knows there were moments she could have spoken up. Moments she could have paused. Moments she could have said, I can't do this right now. But those moments felt dangerous. They felt like they might threaten connection, so she stayed quiet. She stepped in, she carried on. And resentment builds in the gap between what she gives and what she needs. This is why the resentment feels confusing. Because the people around her may not actually be asking too much. They may simply be responding to what's available, to what she's consistently offered. And that realisation can be painful because it means the resentment isn't solved by blaming others. It's solved by something far harder. Naming herself, naming her limits, naming her needs, naming where generosity has tipped into self-erasure. And that's terrifying for someone whose safety has long depended on being agreeable. So instead of addressing the root, she often doubles down. She gives more, hoping that if she just does enough, the resentment will go away. But it doesn't. It grows quietly until connection starts to feel heavy instead of nourishing, until care feels like obligation, until the very relationship she's been protecting begin to feel like a burden. And that's the moment many women start to think, maybe I'm just not cut out for this anymore. Maybe I've changed. Maybe I'm the problem. But what's actually happening is simpler and kinder. Her system is signalling that something essential has been missing for a long time. Not appreciation and not recognition, but reciprocity. And until that's restored, resentment will keep knocking. Not to punish her, but to wake her up. By this point, many women start looking for a way out. They recognise the pattern. They feel the resentment. They sense the cost. And almost immediately, advice appears. Say no more often. Set boundaries. Stop people-pleasing. Put yourself first. On the surface, it sounds reasonable. But for women in this pattern, that advice rarely lands. Not because they don't understand it, but because their bodies don't trust it. The martyr's not struggling with skills. She knows how to articulate. She knows how to communicate. She knows how to be thoughtful and clear. What she's navigating is something much older than language. Her nervous system learned, often early, often quietly, that connection equals safety. And safety is not abstract. Safety is belonging, being included, being wanted, not being the one who causes disruption. So when someone says, just say no, her body doesn't hear empowerment, it hears risk. Risk of disappointing someone, risk of being seen as difficult, risk of being excluded, judged, or quietly sidelined. And that risk doesn't feel theoretical, it feels real. So her system does what it's always done. It chooses the strategy that once worked. Placate, adapt, smooth, carry more. This is why change doesn't happen through force. You can't override a survival response with logic. You can't shame it into submission. And you can't will yourself into boundaries when your body believes that boundaries are dangerous. That's why so many women cycle through the same frustration. They recognise the pattern. They promise themselves they'll do things differently. They hold a boundary once, and then something uncomfortable happens. Someone reacts. Someone withdraws. Someone's disappointed, and immediately the nervous system lights up. This is what I was trying to avoid. So she retreats. She over-explains. She apologises. She takes it back. not because she's weak, but because her system is doing its job, protecting connection. This is the part that's rarely acknowledged. The martyr isn't choosing self-sacrifice over self-respect. She's choosing survival over threat. And until that distinction is understood, change will always feel like failure, because it will keep asking her to do something her body believes is unsafe. The shift doesn't begin with saying no. It begins with restoring internal safety, with learning, slowly, that connection can survive truth, that belonging doesn't require disappearance, that relationships can hold discomfort without collapsing, and learning can't be rushed. It happens in increments. One moment where she doesn't immediately rescue someone, one moment where she lets someone else feel disappointed, one moment where she stays with the discomfort instead of smoothing it away. Not as an act of rebellion, as an act of trust. Trust that connection doesn't have to be earned through sacrifice. Trust that her presence is enough. This is not about becoming less caring. It's about becoming less afraid of what happens when she cares for herself too. And that's where the pattern finally begins to loosen. Not through confrontation, through safety. At some point, often quietly, a different question begins to surface. Not, how do I stop doing this? But, what if connection doesn't actually require me to disappear? This is not dramatic insight. It doesn't arrive with confidence or certainty. It arrives tentatively, as a curiosity, as a soft resistance to the idea that self-sacrifice is the price of belonging. Because somewhere underneath the martyr pattern, something else is still alive. A knowing. That connection once felt different. That being with people used to be nourishing, not something she had to manage. That care didn't always come with a cost. This is where the tribe builder begins to re-emerge, not as someone who gives less, but as someone who gives from a different place. Connection without compromise doesn't mean withdrawing. It doesn't mean becoming colder or harder. It doesn't mean caring less. It means staying with herself while staying in relationship, which is actually much harder than it sounds. It means allowing tension to exist without immediately resolving it, allowing disappointment without rushing to repair it, allowing others to feel what they feel without taking responsibility for it, not as punishment, not as withdrawal, but as truth. Because real connection is not fragile. It doesn't collapse the moment someone says no. It doesn't shatter because a boundary is named. It doesn't require constant smoothing to survive. That belief that connection is always one misstep away from rupture belongs to an earlier chapter. A chapter shaped by survival. But connection built in adulthood between equals has more capacity than that. And learning this isn't cognitive, it's embodied. It happens in moments where she doesn't rush in, where she pauses instead of placating, where she notices the urge to smooth and chooses to stay present instead. Not to prove anything, and it's not to be brave, but to remain intact. This is where power shifts for the tribe builder. Because when she stops managing everyone else's emotional experience, something unexpected happens. Her presence deepens. She becomes less accommodating and more real, less overextended and more grounded, less responsible for harmony and more capable of genuine intimacy. People feel it, not always comfortably, but authentically. And that authenticity does something connection built on sacrifice never can. It invites reciprocity. Others begin to step forward. Others take responsibility for their own feelings. Others meet her instead of leaning on her. Not because she demanded it, but because she made space for it. This is not the end of the martyr pattern. It doesn't vanish once it's understood, but it loosens. Its grip softens. And in its place, something steadier begins to form. A tribe builder who still loves people, still values connection, still cares deeply, but no longer at the cost of herself. That's not selfishness, that's intent. There's a moment many women arrive at, sometimes without naming it. A moment when they realise they've been very good at being there for others, very skilled at holding space, at keeping things smooth, and making sure no one feels too uncomfortable for too long. And yet they begin to sense how long it's been since they've stayed fully with themselves. Not withdrawn, not closed, just present. The question that surfaces isn't dramatic. It's simple. Who would I be if I didn't earn belonging by disappearing? That question doesn't ask for an answer. It asks for honesty. Because once it's asked, something can't quite go back to sleep. She starts noticing the moment she moves to smooth things over, the moment she says yes before checking in, the moment she carries something that was never actually hers to carry. Not to judge it, not to fix it, just to see it. And seeing it changes the shape of things. Slowly. She may still step in, still care, still offer warmth and connection, but now there's a pause, a choice, a sense of herself as someone who belongs without disappearing. And that's where the real work begins, not in doing less, but in staying. Staying with her own truth, staying with discomfort, staying present even when connection isn't perfectly smooth. Because connection that requires self-erasure was never safety, it was survival. And she doesn't need that strategy anymore. Not because she's stronger now, but because she's allowed to be whole. I'm Ros Cardinal. This is the Archetype Effect. And next time we'll explore what happens when women stop carrying emotional labour alone and how power shifts when responsibility, influence and care are finally shared. Thanks for joining me on the Archetype Effect. If this episode sparked an insight, share it with a woman who leads, or leave a review so more women can find these conversations. Until next time, lead with purpose and power that feels like you.